The Alpha King of Rimehold could hold the woman he loved for one night out of 30. One night when the moon came up full and white over the ice fields, not one breath more. Every other night of the month, his touch pulled the warmth out of whatever it landed on. Water went to ice in a cup he held too long. Small white flowers of frost opened on a door frame where he set his hand. His people loved him and kept their distance, and nobody in that keep above the tree line had felt the warmth of their king's hand in 19 years. So on the first cold night of the year, the Alpha King of Rimehold knelt on the floor of his own tower, alone, and scratched a short line into the stone with the point of a knife. He had bought a spring once. The valley below him had been dying under a winter that would not lift, and a courteous man in a gray coat had offered to sell the thaw back, and named the price in a pleasant voice. The warmth of the hearth of Rimehold, held by the King of Rimehold, until the 20th winter. The king had signed, the snow had gone, the children had lived, and he had been counting ever since. When a bone setter from the valley finally climbed that stair and found that wall, she would learn two things in the same hour, and the second one would be far worse than the first. Every mark was a day he did not have anymore, and he had already decided, quietly, years before she ever arrived, exactly how the counting was going to end. Neither of them knew that the one thing his creditor had never thought to put a price on was a woman who tied knots for a living. Chapter 1. Mirren Vale climbed the widow's stair in the last storm of winter, and she counted the switchbacks so she would not have to think about the drop. 41, 42. At every turn, a post had been driven into the rock with a guide rope strung between, and her family made rope, so she could tell by the lay of this one that it had been spliced 11 times and would hold a falling man for about as long as it takes to be sorry. Above the tree line there was nothing soft left in the world. No pines, no birds, no green. Only stone the color of an old bruise, snow coming sideways, and somewhere up in all that white, a keep called Rimehold with a gate lantern burning. She was 34 years old, dark auburn hair in a single braid, green eyes she had straight from her grandmother, and she had taken the post because the pay was 3 times what a valley bone setter made. That was the reason she gave people anyway. She thought it was even mostly true. The gate opened before she knocked. A big man stood in it with a lantern, black hair going white at the temples, hazel eyes, a wolf's stillness in the way he held his shoulders. "You are the bone setter," the man said. "Tolvin Reed, captain of the King's Guard. You are 4 hours later than you said." "I am 4 hours later than you hoped," Mirren said. "I am exactly on time for the weather." Captain Reed looked at her a moment. Then something around his mouth loosened, and he stood aside. Inside, the keep was warm. That surprised her. She had expected a stone box full of drafts, and instead, the corridors held heat like a bread oven, and every room they passed had 2 fires in it. Not 1, 2. One built up against the near wall, and a second, smaller and better tended, set at the far end where nobody sat. The housekeeper was waiting at the foot of the great stair, iron gray hair pinned tight, brown eyes that went over Mirren once and priced her. "Marta Colt," the housekeeper said. "I run this keep, and I say these once. You never touch the king. Not his hand, not his sleeve, not his shoulder. You do not take anything from his hand, and you do not put anything into it. Every room has 2 fires, and the far fire is his, and you do not let it go out, ever, whatever else is burning in this keep. And when the horn sounds at dusk, on the night the moon comes full, you go down to the lower hall with everyone else, and you stay there until morning." "Why?" Mirren said. "Because I told you," said Marta Colt. Mirren thought, in the plain way she thought about a bone that had set crooked, that she had just been handed 3 rules and no reasons, and that the reason is always the part somebody is ashamed of. She said none of that. She said, "Where do I work?" They gave her a room off the guard hall with a good bench and a copper basin. She unpacked her ledger before her tools because that was how she had always done it. A column for the name, a column for the injury, a column for the day. Her grandmother had taught her that a thing you have not written down is a thing you are going to be wrong about later. At supper, she saw him for the first time. The long hall at Rimehold sat 200 people, and the noise of it was ordinary, boots and bowls and somebody's bad singing. At the head table, the Alpha King of the Kell sat with his back straight and his food untouched. Black hair, gone gray at the left temple in a single streak. Eyes the color of the sky over the ice fields, a flat winter gray, with a thin ring of amber around the outside that caught the fire and gave him away as what he was. He wore gloves at his own table, oiled gray leather worn soft at the knuckles. Mirren watched him lift his cup and look into it and set it down again with great care. The wine in it had gone to ice. Chapter 2. Her first week at Rimehold taught her that the guards broke bones the way other men lost buttons. It was the ice. The stair to the upper ward was cut stone, and the wind polished it every night into something closer to glass, and men who could hear a hare's heartbeat at 100 paces still went down it in the dark like fools. She set 2 wrists, 1 collarbone, and a thumb, and wrote every one in her ledger with the day beside it. She liked the work. She had not expected to. On the 8th day, the king came to her door. She heard the hall go quiet before she heard him, which she would later understand was how everyone in Rimehold knew he was coming. He stopped in her doorway and did not enter. "Soren Ashfell," he said, as if she might not have worked that out. "You set Captain Reed's shoulder yesterday without letting him tell you it was fine." "It was not fine," Mirren said. "It was in 2 pieces of a shape that should be 1 piece." Something moved across his face, not a smile. The place where a smile would have been if he had let it. He looked at the bench, at the splints laid out by length, at the ledger lying open with her small, square handwriting running down the page. "You keep a record," Soren said. "I keep a record of everything," Mirren said. "Bones, thread, the weather, how much lamp oil I have used. My grandmother said a thing you have not written down is a thing you will be wrong about later." He was quiet for long enough that she looked up. "Your grandmother," the king said, "was correct." He did not come in. He did not take off the gloves. He asked 3 exact questions about how much bonework the keep would need in a hard winter, listened to all 3 answers without interrupting, thanked her, and left. Mirren stood there afterward and thought, with some irritation, that the man had not said 1 warm word, and she had still wanted him to stay. That night, she went looking for the hearth ledger. Marta Colt had said the far fires must never go out, and Mirren had a professional weakness for any system somebody guards that hard. So she asked how the fuel was tracked, and Marta Colt, who respected competence more than she respected people, showed her. It was a beautiful ledger. Every hearth in Rimehold had a page, and every page had the same shape. At the start of a month, the far fires burned an ordinary amount of wood. Then, day by day, the amount crept up. By the 3rd week, those small far fires were eating twice what the great fires ate, and the keep still ran cold enough that Marta Colt issued extra blankets on a schedule. Then, on one night in the month, the whole thing dropped back to nothing at all. The night the moon came full. Mirren closed the ledger and stood in the cold little office with her hand flat on the cover, and realized she had just found the shape of something without finding the thing itself. Something in this keep was drinking the heat, and once a month, for one night, it stopped. Chapter 3. By her 3rd week at Rimehold, Mirren had stopped pretending she was not investigating. She was careful about it, because she was a woman alone in a mountain keep where the wages were good and the rules were strange. So she did what she had always done with a difficult break. She stopped guessing and started measuring. She wrote down the frost. On a morning near the end of the month, she found the door frame outside the council room, crusted white in a patch the size of a spread hand, 5 fingers of it clear as writing, and the corridor itself perfectly warm. Frost does not choose. Frost takes a whole wall or none of it. This had taken the shape of somebody leaning. She looked at it for a long time. Then she drew it in her ledger. She started noticing other things after that. The way you start hearing a word once you have learned it. The king never handed anything to anyone. Servant set his plate down and stepped back before he reached. And in a keep of 400 people and a wolf king, there was not one dog and not one cat. And when she asked the kitchen why, the cook said they did not thrive up here, and changed the subject to bread. And she noticed the thing that unsettled her most, because it was not fear. They loved him. Marta Colt spoke about the king in the tone other women used for a difficult son. Tolvin Reed would have walked into the sea for him. Whatever was wrong in Rimehold, nobody was afraid of Soren Ashfell. They were afraid for him. Mirren sat on her bench on the 27th day of the month, with her ledger open on her knees, and set it out plainly to herself, because she thought better when she made it plain. The keep grows colder all month. The far fires eat more and more. Frost takes the shape of his hand. Nobody touches him. And one night out of every 30, all of it stops. She did not know what it meant. She only knew it was not an illness because illnesses do not keep a calendar. That evening the horn sounded at dusk. She had never heard it before, and it went through the stone of the keep like a hand on the back of her neck, one long, low note, and Rimehold answered it the way a household answers a thing it has done 1,000 times. Bowls carried down, blankets out. 400 people took themselves and their supper into the lower hall below the kitchens, cheerfully, without hurry. Mirren caught Tolvin Reed at the stairhead with a stack of blankets on his arm. "Captain," Mirren said, "where does the king go?" "The North Tower," Tolvin Reed said, "alone. He does not want anyone." "That is not the same as not needing anyone," Mirren said. Tolvin Reed looked at her with an expression she could not read at all, and it lasted a second too long to be nothing. "Bonesetter," he said, "there is one night a month in this keep where the rule is different, and nobody has ever had to say out loud what the difference is. Go down with the others, or do not. That has always been the whole of it." And he went down the stairs and left her standing at the top of them, in a keep gone empty and silent around her, with the moon coming up full and white over the ice fields. Chapter 4. She did not go down. Mirren stood at the stairhead in the emptied keep for as long as it took her to be honest with herself, which was not very long, and then she went the other way. The ramparts were bitter. The wind came off the ice fields in a long, steady push, and the moon was up over the eastern shoulder of the mountain, so full and so close that the snow had gone blue and every stone threw a shadow. He was already there. The Alpha King of the Kell stood at the parapet, with his back to her and his head tipped up, and he was not wearing a coat. He was in shirt sleeves at the top of a mountain in the last week of winter, and his hands were bare. "You should be below," Soren said without turning. "So should you," Mirren said. "You are not dressed for the roof." "No," he agreed. "I am not." He turned around, and she understood, before he said one word about it, that she was looking at a different man. Not softer. The winter-gray eyes were the same, and the straight-back stillness was the same. But the color had come up under his skin, and there was steam coming off his forearms where the snow landed and melted on him, and the whole shape of him had changed the way a house changes when somebody lights it. He was warm. She could feel it from 4 feet away, standing in a wind that was trying to kill her. "Ah," Mirren said. "There it is." Soren looked at her, and she watched him decide something. Give me your hands, he said. Mardacolt told me not to. Mardacolt is correct on every night but this one, Soren said. Mirren Vale, give me your hands. She thought quite clearly that a sensible woman would ask the question first, and then she took 2 steps forward and put her cold red hands into the bare hands of the Alpha King of Rimehold, and the heat of him went up her arms like the first swallow of something strong. How long? Mirren said at last. Until the moon goes off the ridge, Soren said, a little before dawn, and then I put the gloves back on, and I do not do this again for 30 days. Mirren looked down at their hands. His were scarred across the backs, a working man's hands under a king's authority, and they were shaking very slightly, and she did not think that was cold. You have not asked me anything, Soren said. I have about 40 questions, Mirren said. I am aware that if I ask them tonight, you will answer none of them, and I will have spent the 1 night a month you can stand out here in your shirt talking about paperwork. That was when she got the smile. It was small, and it went across his face fast, like a bird crossing a window, and it took 10 years off him. Walk with me, said Soren Ashfell. So they walked the whole ring of the ramparts of Rimehold in the blue light with the ice fields going out silver to the horizon, and he told her the names of the peaks and which pass the traders used before it closed. He asked her about the rope walk. She told him how a rope is laid, 3 strands turned one way and the whole turned the other, and how the tension of a rope against itself is the only reason it holds anything at all. That is a good craft, Soren said. It is a stubborn craft, Mirren said. It is mostly counting, turns, yarns, days of drying. If you lose count, you get a rope that looks perfect and parts under load. The Alpha King of the Kell stopped walking and stood in the moonlight on his own wall and looked at her as if she had said something in a language he had not heard spoken in 19 years. They stayed out until the moon came down onto the western ridge and the light went thin and gray. At the top of the stairs, with the dawn coming, he let go of her hands and stepped back and picked up the gloves from where he had left them folded on the stone. Mirren Vale, he said, pulling the first one on. Do not be here next month. Why? Mirren said. Because I have been very careful for 19 years, Soren said, and you have been in this keep for 3 weeks. He went. She stood there with the warmth going out of her fingers and the whole keep coming awake below her, and Mirren Vale realized that she was already counting the days to the next full moon, and that she had absolutely no intention of doing what he asked. Chapter 5. The month after that first moon night was the strangest courtship Mirren had ever heard of, because from the outside it looked like nothing at all. He did not come to her room again. He did not speak to her in the hall beyond a good evening. The Alpha King of the Kell went back to being a courteous stranger in gloves. But things kept arriving. A proper double-chamber bellows for heating her irons, a bigger basin, a joiner who spent a morning cutting a second window into her east wall because the king had wanted to know whether the bone setter could see her stitches and had not waited for an answer. Then came the tea. A small sack of it on her bench, dry gray leaves that smelled of the low woods, and Mirren stood there feeling absurd, because it was mountain nettle and rosehip, which is a valley grandmother's tea, and there was nowhere above the tree line it could have come from. Somebody had sent down the stair for it, in winter. She went to Mardacolt. I want to know what is wrong with him, Mirren said. Mardacolt did not pretend not to understand, which was the thing Mirren came to respect about her. I have served 2 kings in this keep, Mardacolt said. I buried the first one. I am not going to be the one who tells the second one's business to a woman he has clearly decided to be careful with. If he wants you to know, he will tell you. That is not an answer, Mirren said. That is a locked door with good manners on it. Yes, Mardacolt agreed, and went back to her lists. So Mirren did the only thing she had left, which was to keep writing everything down. She went back through the old hearth ledgers, 3 years, 6 years, 10, and charted them the way you chart a fever. And what she found made her set the pen down. Every month the cold climbed and then dropped away on the moon night, exactly as she had seen. But it never began again from the same place. The starting point was higher every single year. Not by much, by a little, relentlessly, the way water gets into stone. Whatever was taking the heat out of Rimehold was not steady. It was growing. That was the night she went up the North Tower. She told herself she was going to knock. She got to the top of the winding stair and found the door standing open on a dark room, no fire in it at all, not even the far one, and cold coming out of it like the breath off a river. Mirren stepped in and lifted her lamp, and every wall of that room, from the floor to as high as a tall man could reach, was covered in small, scratched marks. Chapter 6. She counted them. Of course she counted them. It was the only thing her hands knew how to do while her mind caught up. They were cut into the stone in groups of 5, in neat courses that ran around the room like written lines. The oldest ones near the top were worn soft at the edges. The newest, down at the height of a kneeling man, were sharp and pale where the knife had taken the skin off the rock. She measured a course with her handspan, multiplied, and stopped breathing. Days. They were days. And there were something like 7,000 of them. 19 years, she thought. Almost exactly 19 years. You count fast. Mirren turned around. Soren Ashfell stood in the doorway of his own tower with a lamp in his gloved hand, and he did not look angry. She would have preferred angry. I am sorry, Mirren said. The door was open. It is always open, Soren said. Nobody comes up. He came in and set his lamp on the sill, and the light spread out over all that scratched stone, and Mirren watched him look at it the way a man looks at a field he has plowed himself. 19 years, she said. 19 years and 106 days, said Soren. He crossed to the north wall and touched one of the low, fresh marks with the tip of a gloved finger, almost fondly, and Mirren realized her hands were shaking and made them stop. You should understand something, Soren said, so that you do not spend the winter guessing wrong. Every mark on that wall is a day I do not have anymore. The room was very cold. Counting down, Mirren said. To the end of a term, he said. And what happens then? Soren Ashfell turned and looked at her with those flat winter eyes, and he answered in the same courteous, unhurried voice he used to ask about splints and fuel. Then Rimehold gets a better king, he said. Mirren stood in the dark with her lamp in her fist and understood all at once that she was not investigating an illness or a haunting or a family curse in the way stories have them. She was standing inside a countdown, and the man running it had already made his peace. No, she said. Soren's eyebrows went up a fraction. No? You have given me an ending and no story, Mirren said. I am a bone setter. If a man comes to me and says the leg is finished, I still look at the leg. Mirren Vale, he said, and there was something under his voice now that had been held down so long it had gone hoarse. Go down the stair. Take the good wages. There is nothing up here for you. There is a wall with 7,000 marks on it, Mirren said, and a man who has been alone with it. That is the worst thing I have seen in my life. He did not have an answer for that. She left him in the tower and went down the winding stair with her heart slamming, and at the bottom she stopped and pressed her forehead to the cold stone and said the plain shape of it inside her own head, because she thought better when she made it plain. 1 night in 30 he could touch her. Every other night he was being drained, and at the end of a number he already knew, he expected to be gone. She had until the count ran out. Chapter 7. The next 3 moon nights were the best nights of her life, which is a hard thing to say about 3 nights inside 4 months. 30 days of a courteous stranger in gloves, and then 1 night. On the second one, they danced. The great hall stood empty, with the tables pushed back, and 400 people singing 3 floors below. And Soren Ashfell put his bare hand flat between her shoulder blades and turned her slowly around the flagstones, to music neither of them could hear properly. And Mirren laughed until she had to stop and hold on to him. That was the night he told her about the thaw. There was a winter that would not end, Soren said. The year my father died. 2 years of it. The pass at the Ram's Neck closed with 40 families on the wrong side, and by the end the Kell was eating its seed corn, and I was 20, and I had been king for 11 months. It was not weather. Weather argues. This did not argue. And it broke, Mirren said. My grandmother used to say the spring came back in a single night. It did, Soren said. He said nothing else, and she let it go, because it was a moon night, and she had already learned that the way to lose him was to reach for the thing he was standing in front of. On the 3rd moon night, she stopped pretending about what she wanted. They were in the North Tower, which he had let her light a fire in for the first time in 19 years, and the room with all its scratched marks looked entirely different with a fire in it. He was so warm that the frost had run off the inside of the window in long, clean lines. Are you being careful with me because of what you are, Mirren said, or because you do not want me? The Alpha King of the Kell put his bare hand along her jaw, which he had not done before, and she felt the heat of it go all the way down to her heels. Mirren, he said, I have 30 days a month to think, and I have not thought about anything else since you walked in out of that storm and told Tolvin Reed you were on time for the weather. Then stop being careful, Mirren said, for the next 5 hours. He did. There was a fire in that tower, and a moon on the ice fields, and a man who had gone 19 years without being touched, and Mirren would remember the shaking in his hands longer than anything else about it. Not want. She knew what want felt like. This was a man who had forgotten he was a living, warm thing, and was being reminded, badly, all at once. Afterward, she lay with her cheek on his chest, listening to the enormous, unhurried thump of a wolf's heart, and thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that she would take 1 night in 30 of this for the rest of her life and call it a fair trade, and that she was not going to have to, because she was going to fix it. She woke at gray dawn alone, with the fire gone down and her coat spread over her. He was across the room, kneeling at the north wall in his shirt sleeves, with the small knife in his hand, cutting the day's mark into the stone. And Mirren, sitting up with her braid coming loose, saw something she had not seen before by lamplight. There was a second row. Low, near the floor, in the corner, in a place a man would have to lie down to reach comfortably. A short, new line of marks, cut with the same knife, running the opposite way around the room. Chapter 8. The man who came to Rimehold to collect arrived on a clear morning at the end of that month, in a gray coat, on foot, up a stair that had killed 4 men in Mirren's lifetime. She was in the courtyard when the gate opened, and she saw the whole keep change. It was not fear exactly. It was the way a room changes when someone brings in an animal that has bitten before. Tolvin Reed stepped in front of 2 of his own young guards without seeming to. Marta Colt put down what she was holding and folded her hands. The man in the gray coat was slight and very neat, white hair combed back, a clean-shaven face with no particular age in it, and eyes so pale a gray that at 10 paces they looked like nothing at all, like the sky behind snow. Ivor Marrow, he said, to the courtyard in general, pleasantly. I am expected. Mirren's hands had gone cold, and she did not know why yet. Then she did. It came up out of her childhood the way a smell does. Her grandmother, Orla Vale, sitting in the loft of the rope walk in Thornbeck, with a length of knotted cord across her knees, saying in the flat voice she kept for serious things, that there were men who bought and sold in warmth, and that a good knot was the only thing in the world they were afraid of, and that this was exactly why the knotting had been made unlawful, and by whom. Mirren had been 11. She had thought it was a story. They took Ivor Marrow into the council room, and Mirren went in behind them with a bag of splints and the blank face of a servant, and nobody stopped her. And afterward she understood that Soren had seen her come in and had let it happen. Marrow sat down. He put a cloth roll on the table and unrolled it, and inside was a cord, longer than a man's arm, gray, laid 3-strand, knotted along its whole length in tight, complicated groups. Mirren's rope-maker's eye read the lay of it before her mind caught up. Somebody had turned that cord against itself with enormous skill. It was under tension. It was, in the way a rope is, still working. "The 19th accounting," said Ivor Marrow. "Shall I read it, or shall we be quick?" "Read it," Soren said. And Marrow read, in a light, pleasant, unhurried voice, the terms that Mirren had climbed a mountain to find, that in the second winter of the reign of Soren Ashfell, the Ram's Neck being closed and the Kell being in famine, the binder Ivor Marrow did lift the winter from the valley entire, and did return the season to it, that in payment the hearth of Rimehold and the warmth thereof was pledged to the binder, and would be drawn down year upon year, increasing as the cord tightened. That on the night the moon stood full, the cord went slack for the space of that night, the moon holding an older claim upon a wolf than any binder could overwrite, and that this slackening was a courtesy of the craft and not a right. That the term of the pledge was 20 winters, ending at the turn of the longest night, and that the pledge was held, not by the man, but by the office, by the King of Rimehold, and by his blood after him, until the debt was answered in kind. The room was quite silent. Mirren stood against the wall with a bag of splints in her arms and did the arithmetic she had been doing all her life, and it came out in one clean line. 5 full moons. That was what was left. 5 nights on which the man she loved could touch her, and then the longest night, and then the cord came in. And it would not stop with him. That was the part that took the floor out from under her. It went to his blood after him. This was not a curse laid on Soren Ashfell. It was a lien on a throne, written by a man who intended to farm this mountain for as long as there were Ashfells to freeze. Which meant there was exactly one way Soren could think of to end it, and he had thought of it 19 years ago, and he had never once mentioned marriage or an heir or the future of the Kell. He was not planning to survive the longest night. He was planning to be the last king of Rimehold. Chapter 9. She waited until Ivor Marrow was off the mountain. Then she went up the tower and did not knock. "You are going to let it take you," Mirren said, "and you are going to let the line end with you, because a dead man with no children is a debt with nowhere to go." Soren Ashfell stood at the window with his back to her and did not turn around. "Yes," he said. "Say the rest of it." "Rimehold passes to the Kell," Soren said, "under Tolvin Reed as warden, with no crown on it. A warden is not a king. The cord names the King of Rimehold. If there is no such office, and no blood to carry it, the cord has nothing left to hold, and it goes slack. The valley keeps the spring I bought. It costs 1 man. He turned then. "I have had 19 years to look for another door. There is not one." "You looked alone," Mirren said. "I looked with the best people in this kingdom." "You looked with soldiers and stewards," Mirren said, "and not one of them has ever laid a rope in their lives." She was shaking now, and she let herself shake. "Soren, that thing on the table today was a cord. Not a spell. a cord. 3-strand, hard laid, knotted in groups of 9, and turned back against itself, and the tension in it is doing the work. I could see the tension. He went very still. My grandmother was an oathwright, Mirren said. Orla Vale of Thornbeck. She read chords and she tied them, and when the knotting was outlawed, she put her tools in a chest in the loft and taught me anyway, in the evenings, because she said one day somebody in this valley would need to read a thing that a courteous man was reading out loud to them. For a moment, one moment, she saw it go through him. Hope. It came up in his face like a light under a door. Then he closed it. No, said Soren Ashfell. You do not get to say no to this. Reading a live chord costs the reader, he said. Marrow told me that himself, the first year, in the voice of a man describing the weather. A binder's cord is under load, and anything that touches it under load takes some of that load away with it. Soren crossed the room and stopped a careful arm's length from her, which was the closest he could come, and Mirren hated that distance more in that moment than she had ever hated anything. I have spent 19 years paying for a valley. I will not spend you as well. That is not your decision, Mirren said. It is entirely my decision, he said. I am the king. And Mirren Vale looked at the man she loved and understood something that made her want to throw the lamp at him. He was not protecting a secret anymore. He had told her all of it. He was protecting his own arithmetic, because he had made his peace with one death, and he could not afford to start hoping for 2 lives. Chapter 10. The 5th moon from the end was the best night they ever had, and it was the night he ended it. She knew something was wrong from the first hour, and went on anyway, because there were only so many of these left, and she was not going to waste one arguing. They ate on the floor of the North Tower in front of the fire, bread and cold mutton and the last of the valley tea, and he was warm and unguarded, and he laughed twice, out loud. He asked her to explain rope again, and listened to every word with his chin on his fist, like a man memorizing a road. Near the middle of the night, Mirren put her hand flat on his chest and said the thing she had been carrying up and down that tower stair for a month. I love you, Mirren said. I am aware of the arithmetic. I am saying it anyway. Soren Ashfell closed his eyes. Come here, he said. Later, when the fire was low, he told her about the 2nd row of marks. She had not asked. She had decided not to ask, and he told her anyway, which was how she knew he had already made up his mind about something. The top rows are days I have spent, Soren said. I cut the first one the morning after I signed. There will be 7,300 of them, and when the last goes into that wall, the term is up. For 19 years, that was the only number in my life. And the low row, Mirren said. That one is not spending anything, he said. It starts at 1. It starts on the night a bone setter walked out onto my rampart in a storm coat and told me I was not dressed for the roof. He was looking at the wall, not at her. 19 years I counted what I had left. Then, for 4 months, I have been counting something else, and I have caught myself wanting the count to be longer. That is new. I did not think anything new was going to happen to me. Mirren put her arms around him and did not say anything, because her throat had shut. She woke at first light to the sound of a man dressing, and then fully at the sight of Marta Colt in the tower doorway, with Mirren's own satchel in her hands, packed, the straps buckled. Soren, Mirren said. He was at the window with the gloves already on. He had put them on before the moon was even down, and she understood he had done that on purpose, so that he could not change his mind by touching her. Your contract with the Crown of Rimehold is discharged in full, Soren said. You are paid to the end of the year and a year beyond it. Captain Reed will take you down the widow's stair with a sled and 4 men and see you to your brother's door in Thornbeck. Do not do this. Marrow has seen you, Soren said, and his voice cracked on the second word and then went flat again. He asked Marta twice who the woman with the ledger was. That man buys and sells in what people love, and he has now looked directly at the only thing I have that he could still take. So we fight him. There are 4 moons left, Soren said. I am not spending them watching you get closer to him. He turned around. Whatever he had been holding in his face all month was not being held anymore, and Mirren thought about that for the rest of her life, because it was the only time she ever saw him look like a man drowning. Go home, said the Alpha King of the Kell. Please. Chapter 11. They put her on a sled with a fur over her knees like an invalid, and Tolvin Reed walked the whole 7 hours down beside it and did not say one word until the tree line. Then he said, For what it is worth, Bonesetter, he is wrong. He has never once been wrong about the safe thing. That is his trouble. He has been right about the safe thing for 19 years, and it has cost him everything. At Thornbeck, her brother Tam Vale opened the door of the rope walk house, took one look at her face, and stepped back to let her in without a single question, which is the finest thing a brother has ever done. She gave herself 2 days. She spent the first in a chair by the window with her jaw set. Sent away. Paid off. Handled, kindly and completely, by a man who thought love meant carrying the whole weight himself and had never been told that this is a kind of vanity. She spent the second day being furious, which was better. And on the third morning, Mirren Vale climbed the ladder into the loft of her family's rope walk, in among the drying frames and the smell of tar, and pulled out the chest that had sat there for 23 years with her grandmother's name burned into the lid. Orla Vale's tools were inside, wrapped in oiled cloth. Horn picks worn shiny at the tips, a pricker, 3 lengths of practice cord gone furred with use, and at the bottom, a bundle of paper. Mirren sat down on the boards, with the light coming through the roof slats, and read her grandmother's handwriting for the first time in a very long while. Most of it was craft, knot forms, the naming of parts, the wrongs and rights of tension. She read it all twice, and the whole time something was going up her spine. Because the craft was rope. Exactly rope. 3-strand, hard laid, turned back against itself. She had been raised inside this language and had never known it had a second meaning. Then, near the end, in a note her grandmother had written for no one but herself, Mirren found the thing. A binder holds by his word, Orla Vale had written. That is the whole of his power, and it is also the whole of his cage. A cord holds because the binder's word holds. Therefore, a binder cannot refuse a valid tender. If payment is offered in the kind the cord names, and the tender is good, he must take it, or his word is shown to be breakable, and every cord he holds anywhere goes slack in the same hour. They will let you die rather than tell you this. They had us outlawed rather than let us say it aloud. Mirren read it 4 times. Then she sat back against the chest in the dusty loft light, with her heart going like a hammer, and said it out loud to the empty room, because saying a thing out loud is how you find out whether it is real. The debt is a thaw, Mirren said. He is owed warmth. Warmth is the kind. And down in the valley below her, in 300 houses, and 11 hamlets and 1 small town, every single hearth that had survived the year the spring came back was burning. Chapter 12. She went to find Ivor Marrow, which was the most frightening thing she had ever chosen to do, and she did it in a busy market so that she could not talk herself out of it. He kept a booth at the winter fair in Thornbeck, which nobody in the valley found strange, and which Mirren could not stop looking at once she saw it. A plain gray awning between the cheese seller and the man who sharpened blades. A neat table. A line of people. She stood across the lane and watched for an hour. a woman with a sick child, a man whose barn had burned, 2 brothers arguing over a debt. They went in worried and came out with their shoulders down and their faces loose with relief. And every one of them carried away a short length of gray cord with a single knot in it. And every one of them went home a little paler than they came. He was not a monster in a mountain. He was a business. And he had been operating in her valley her entire life, and she had walked past that awning as a child. "Bone setter," said Ivor Marrow, "you have been staring for a while. Come and sit." She crossed the lane and sat down. Up close, his eyes really were almost colorless. His hands were the cleanest she had ever seen on a working man, and he smiled at her with what she would have sworn was genuine warmth if she had not known better. "You have questions," Marrow said. "Everyone does. Ask." "Why do you tell people the terms?" Mirren said. "You could hide them. You read them out loud in a room." Ivor Marrow looked delighted. "Because that is the craft," he said. "A binding that is not understood is not a binding. It is a theft, and a theft comes undone. I have never once lied to a soul in this valley, and that is precisely why nothing I hold has ever come loose." He tilted his head. "You did not come to ask me that." "No," Mirren said. "I came to ask you to sell me the cord of Rimehold." "It is not for sale." "Then let me read it." The fair went on around them, somebody shouting the price of cheese, and Ivor Marrow sat entirely still and considered her with his colorless eyes. Then slowly he smiled. "You know what it costs," he said. "I do. And you are the 4th person in 200 years to ask me, and the other 3 did it in front of witnesses, hoping I would refuse." He brought the cloth roll out of his coat and unwrapped it on the table as calmly as a man laying out cards. "I never refuse. Refusing is what would end me. Put your hand on it and read as long as you can stand. I will tell you now what you will find, because I do not enjoy this part. You will find that it is airtight. 19 years of clever people have looked. Go on." Mirren Vale put her left hand flat on the cord of Rimehold. It was like closing your hand around a wire in a river. She felt it take and pull, and the cold came up her arm in a long, steady drink, and under her fingers the knots opened into meaning, the way a page opens when you finally learn to read. 9 turns for the season lifted, a double bite for the office, not the man, a running loop for the blood after him. And there, worked into the standing part, tight and small, the term. Until the debt be answered in kind. She held on past the point where it hurt. She held on until the pain stopped, which was much worse. She held on until she had the whole length of it in her head, every knot in order. Then she took her hand off the cord, and it was white to the wrist. Not pale, white, like a candle, all the color gone out of it, and she could not feel the table under it. "There," said Ivor Marrow kindly, "airtight. I am sorry about the hand. It will trouble you in the cold for the rest of your life." Mirren looked at her white hand and then up at him, and she smiled at him with everything she had. "Master Marrow," she said, "you were right. You wrote a term into it that nobody could ever meet, and you wrote it in because a binding is not a binding without a way out." She stood and gathered her coat around her, still smiling. "I would like you to know that I am the person who is going to meet it." Chapter 13. She had 39 days, and she needed the whole valley, and she started with the woman who had the least reason to give her anything. Widow Fenn lived at the bottom of the widow's stair in a house with 1 room. She was 71, her eyes were the color of a rain puddle, and she had buried a husband and 2 sons in the 2 years the winter would not lift. Mirren sat at her table and laid it all out: the cord, the office, the 20th winter, the term. "I need coals," Mirren said. "Not money, not a levy. Nobody can order this and nobody can buy it, because a tender is only good if the thing tendered was given freely. I need a live coal out of your own hearth, carried up that stair by your own hand on the longest night." Widow Fen was quiet for a while. "I went up that stair once," she said, 19 years ago, to ask the boy king to do something about the snow. He listened to me for an hour, and he did not make me one promise. And I went home and told my neighbor he was cold as the mountain and would let us all die. He signed it 4 days later," Mirren said. "I know something was paid," said Widow Fen. "I have known for 19 years, and nobody would ever say what." She got up, took a pair of tongs off the wall, and set them on the table with a small, hard sound, like a woman putting down a card. "You will want clay pots with lids," said Widow Fen, "for a coal to live 7 hours in a wind like that. I have 30 in the shed. And you had better start walking, because there are 11 hamlets in this valley, and they will all want to hear it from you, and not from a crier." So Mirren walked. She walked the kell for 5 weeks, with her white hand in a mitten and her ledger under her arm. And she told the story in kitchens and mills and barns and one church, exactly the same way every time, because she had learned in a workroom that people believe the version that does not change. Here is what the king bought. Here is what he paid. Here is the one term that can end it. And here is why one coal from your own fire is worth more in this than everything in your purse. Her brother Tam Vale and the rope walk turned out 400 lengths of carrying cord in 3 weeks, and would not take a coin for any of it. Not everybody said yes. She wrote them down too, without a mark against their names, because she had told them it was free, and she meant it. And on the 4th day before the longest night, a rider came down the widow's stair with the king's own order, and it was read out in the square at Thornbeck. The stair was closed. By command of the Crown of Rimehold, no person of the kell was to set foot on it before the turn of the year, on account of ice and danger to life. Mirren stood in the crowd and listened, and started, very quietly, to laugh. "He knows," she said to Tam. "That is not a man worried about ice. That is a man who has heard what is coming up his mountain, and cannot bear to be paid for." "Mirren," Tam said, "it is the king's order. What do we do?" Mirren Vale looked up at the gray shoulder of the mountain, at the thin scratch of the stair going up into the cloud. "We go anyway," she said. Chapter 14. The longest night of the 20th winter came in clear and windless and very cold, and the moon came up full over the ice fields, and the whole valley started climbing at noon. They went in family groups, with the little clay pots slung on Tam's cord, 1 coal apiece, lids on. Widow Fen went in the first rank and would not be carried. Men who had argued with Mirren in their own kitchens turned up at the bottom of the stair with a pot in each hand and did not explain themselves. Mirren counted at the first switchback because she could not help it, and lost count in the second hour. Tam told her afterward that there were more than 4,000 people on the widow's stair that night, and about 9,000 coals, because most houses had sent more than one. It took 7 hours. Nobody fell. The cord her family had made held every hand that grabbed it. The gates of Rimehold stood open, which she had not expected, and Tolvin Reed stood in them with his helmet under his arm. "Captain," Mirren said, "the stair was closed." "It was," said Tolvin Reed. "I closed it myself. I did a very poor job." The great courtyard filled up with valley people, and lantern light and steam off 4,000 sets of breathing, and the keep came out to meet them, Marta Colt in front with her sleeves rolled. And at the top of the steps, in shirt sleeves, in the full moonlight, stood the Alpha King of the Kell, looking down at his valley standing in his yard. Mirren went up to him. "You closed the stair," Mirren said. "I closed the stair," Soren agreed. "You are a difficult man to give anything to." "Mirren," he said, and stopped, and started again. There is nothing you can bring up this mountain that will not be taken off you by a man who has been doing this since before my grandfather was born." "Take your gloves off," Mirren said. He looked at her. "It is the last moon night," Mirren said. "I have come 7 hours up a stair you closed, with 9,000 coals and 4,000 of your people, and I have 30 minutes before the worst thing in the world walks through that gate, and I would like to be held for 20 of them. Take the gloves off." So the Alpha King of Rimehold took off his gloves on the steps of his own hall in front of his entire kingdom, and put his bare hands on either side of a bone-setter's face, and kissed her, while 4,000 people from the Kell stood in the snow holding fire in clay pots. It was, Mirren thought, an outrageous way to spend 20 minutes of the last night of a man's life. She was still thinking it when the gates went cold. Not dark, cold. The steam went out of the air over 4,000 people at once, and the lantern flames stood up thin and blue, and the courtyard fell absolutely silent. And Ivor Marrow walked in through the gate in his gray coat with the cloth roll under his arm. "Well," he said, looking around at all of them with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "This is new." Chapter 15. Mirren came down the steps and the crowd opened for her, and she stopped 6 feet from Ivor Marrow, which was as close as she intended to get. "Master Marrow," Mirren said, "you are here to collect on the court of Rimehold at the turn of the longest night. Read it out. You always do. You said a binding that is not understood is not a binding. Read it out to all of them." Ivor Marrow smiled and unrolled the cloth and read the whole thing aloud in his light, pleasant voice, exactly as he had read it 19 times before to a room of 5 people. The famine, the lifted winter, the hearth pledged, the office, not the man, the blood after him, until the debt be answered in kind. "There," Marrow said, and began to roll the cloth. "The term ends at midnight. Your Grace, if you would come forward." "No," Mirren said. "Tender is offered." The courtyard did not make a sound. Ivor Marrow stopped rolling the cloth, and for the first time since she had met him, Mirren saw the pleasantness go out of his face like a lamp being carried out of a room. "By whom?" he said. "By the Kell," Mirren said. "Freely. Not by the king, not by the crown, not out of any levy or tax or order, and not one coal of it commanded. Your cord names the kind. The kind is warmth. You lifted a winter off this valley, and you have been drawing the warmth of one hearth ever since." She lifted her white left hand and turned to face the courtyard, and raised her voice so it carried to the back. "There are 9,000 hearths of the Kell in this yard tonight, every one carried by hand up 7 hours of stair, given free, by people who owe you nothing." Widow Fenn took the lid off her pot. The coal in it came up bright orange in the cold. Then the miller. Then a boy of 9 near the gate. Then the whole courtyard. 4,000 lids coming off. 4,000 small fires opening in the dark at once, and the light of it went up the walls of Rimehold and lit the faces of everybody standing on them. "That is not a valid tender," said Ivor Marrow, and his voice was not light anymore. "Loose coals are not a tender. A tender must be bound." "It is bound," Mirren said. She took it out of her coat. 3-strand, hard-laid, valley flax, as long as her arm, and knotted along its whole length in tight, complicated groups, made by her own hands on her family's walk over 39 days. She heard the sound Ivor Marrow made. It was very small. "Orla Vale of Thornbeck was my grandmother," Mirren said. "She taught me in a loft after dark for 7 years, because your people had her craft made unlawful. Read my knots, Master Marrow. Read them out loud, the way you always do. You are not permitted to hold anything you have not explained." And because he was what he was, because his whole power was that his word held. Ivor Marrow put out his beautiful, clean hand and took the cord of the kell and read it. She watched his face as he came down the length of it. 9 turns for the season lifted, matching his own. A double bite for the givers, 4,000 of them, named by Hamlet. The kind, warmth, exact. The measure, 9,000 hearths, freely offered, no debt, no lien, no return expected. And at the standing end, worked small and tight into the part that carries the load, the oathwright's term her grandmother had written down in a loft in Thornbeck and had never once been able to use. That what is given freely cannot be held. Ivor Marrow's hands stopped moving. You may refuse it, Mirren said. You are allowed. You refuse this tender in front of 4,000 witnesses, and your word is shown breakable, and every cord you hold in this valley, and every valley beyond it, goes slack in the same hour. The barnman, the woman with the sick child, all of them free tonight. She let that stand a moment. Or you may accept and be paid in full, and the cord of Rimehold is discharged. You have made me a door with no room behind it, said Ivor Marrow. You taught me how, Mirren said. You told me a binding has to have a way out, and you wrote in a term you were certain nobody could ever meet. That is not my fault, Master Marrow. That is arrogance, and you built your whole house on it. The bell in the gate tower of Rimehold began to strike midnight. Tender accepted, said Ivor Marrow. He said it quietly, and he said it correctly, because he was a craftsman to the last, and the moment the words were out, the whole yard changed. The cord of Rimehold went slack in his left hand. It simply lay down, all that tension gone out of it in an instant. 19 years of turn and load unwinding into a piece of ordinary gray rope. And Soren Ashfell made a sound on the steps behind her that Mirren never described to anyone afterward. Not once, not even to him. And then the warmth came in. 9,000 hearts of the kell, given free, went into Ivor Marrow the way a river goes into a cup. He had held cold for 200 years by never in his life giving anything away. He had no room in him. He looked down at his own hands with an expression of mild, genuine surprise. Ah, said Ivor Marrow, it cannot be held. And it was not violent, and there was nothing to see, and the last of the frostbinder went off the stones of Rimehold as clean meltwater, running away downhill between 4,000 pairs of boots, into the drains, into the mountain, gone. The cold that had been in him went with it. Mirren felt it pass, an enormous, unhurried outbreath moving off the courtyard and up over the ice fields, and somewhere high above them, a great deal of snow that had been waiting 19 years to be ordinary weather began, at last, to fall. Behind her, on the steps, the Alpha King of the Kell went down on one knee in the snow, and every fire in Rimehold, all at once, roared up in its grate. Chapter 16. What Mirren remembered afterward was not the ending of Ivor Marrow. It was the noise. 4,000 people in a courtyard, all of them talking at once, and none of them saying anything sensible. Somebody was crying. Somebody was laughing in that cracked way people laugh when the danger is over and their body has not been told. Widow Fenn sat down on the steps with her empty pot in her lap and would not get up for an hour. Marta Colt walked into the middle of it and started giving orders about bread, because that was how Marta Colt loved people. And Mirren stood in all of it and watched the warmth come back into a man. It was not dramatic. That was the strange part. Soren Ashfell knelt in the snow with his bare hands open on his knees, and the steam came up off him, and the gray went out of his face, and the frost on the step where he had rested his palm melted and ran away and did not come back. He looked, for a moment, like somebody sat down after carrying something heavy up a very long stair. Then he put his head back and made a sound she had never heard out of a man. And the wolf came. Rimehold had not seen its king shift in 19 years. Half the young guards had never known he could. He came out of the shape of a man the way a held breath leaves a chest, enormous and dark and steaming in the cold, and 4,000 people went silent all at once. And the wolf of the Kell stood in the middle of his own courtyard, shaking, with snow melting off his shoulders. He did not howl. He walked to Mirren Vale and pushed his head under her hand and leaned on her until she nearly went over. "All right," Mirren said, into all that fur, with her voice going. "All right." She was still furious with him. That was the thing nobody expects. It came back the next morning, overbred, the way real anger does. He had put her on a sled. He had paid out her contract like a bill and sent her down a mountain with 4 men and a fur over her knees. And he had done it while she was still warm from him, and no amount of dying nobly was going to make that acceptable. She said so, in the long hall, with the valley still there, because nobody had gone home yet, and Soren Ashfell listened to every word without one excuse. And then he did the thing that she had not expected and never forgot. He stood up at the keeping fire, the great hearth of Rimehold, in front of 4,000 valley people and 400 of his own, and he told them all of it. The famine, the gray coat, the price, the office, not the man, the 19 years of marks on his tower wall, and what he had decided to do at the end of them, which was to die quietly and let the Ashfells stop. Nobody in that hall had ever been told. He had carried it alone since he was 20, because he thought that was what a king was. "I was wrong," said the Alpha King of the Kell to his kingdom. "Not about the debt, about who it belonged to. It was never only mine to pay, and I never gave any of you the chance to say so. And a woman from Thornbeck had to walk 11 hamlets to correct me." Then he turned to Mirren. "I have no right to ask you for anything," Soren said, "so I am not going to. I am telling you what is available. If you want the man and not the crown, I will lay it down tonight, and Tolvin Reed will do a better job of it than I have, and I will come down the stair and learn a trade. If you want both, you may have both, and I will spend the rest of my life being someone you did not have to carry up a mountain." The hall was very quiet. "Both," Mirren said. "Obviously both. Sit down before I change my mind." Later, when the keep had finally gone to sleep, she took him up to the north tower and made him look at the wall. "That row stops tonight," Mirren said, pointing at the countdown. "That one does not," she said, pointing at the low row in the corner, the one that started the night she walked out onto his rampart. Epilogue. They were married in the spring, at the tree line, on the first day the low meadow held flowers. It was not a court wedding. There was no room for one, because the whole Kell came. They stood on the grass at the edge of where the trees give up, with the valley green below and Rimehold gray above, and Widow Fenn gave the bride away because Mirren asked her to, and because Tam Vale said he would only cry. Mirren wore her braid down and her grandmother's shears at her belt, and her left hand, still white to the wrist, bare where everyone could see it. Ivor Merrow was gone, and he stayed gone. That is worth saying plainly, because a listener has a right to know. He was not imprisoned, and he did not come back. He accepted a tender he could not hold, and he ended on the stones of Rimehold, and in that same hour every cord he had ever tied went slack, in the Kell and in 5 valleys beyond it. The woman with the sick child in Thornbeck woke up warm. The man whose barn had burned found the gray cord in his kitchen drawer had come undone into plain string. None of them ever knew why. Mirren wrote all their names in her ledger anyway. The winter court sent an envoy that summer, a silver-haired woman named Sivrin, with pale blue eyes and a dry way of talking, and she came up the widow's stair with an apology and a confession. Marrow had been theirs once, long ago, and they had lost him, and they had spent 2 centuries pretending that was the same as being rid of him. Sivrin brought terms. Mirren read every knot of them out loud before anyone signed, which is now simply how things are done in the Kell. Oath writing was made lawful in the 2nd year. Mirren Vale opened a reading school in the loft of the rope walk at Thornbeck, and took 6 students in the 1st year and 19 in the 3rd. And the first thing she taught any of them was that a chord you have not read aloud is a chord you have already lost. The keeping fire at Rimehold burns in the open now. Anyone may walk in and take a coal from it any day of the year, and no one has ever been asked why. The pass at the Ram's Neck opened that first spring and stayed open. Traders came back over it within 2 years. The Kell is not rich, exactly, but no one there has eaten seed corn since, and the high meadows carry sheep again all the way up to the stone. Her hand came back slowly. By the 2nd spring, the color had returned everywhere except a pale band around her wrist, like something she had taken off and never put back on. And she kept that band on purpose, and told people it was the receipt. They live at Rimehold from the thaw to the first snow, and they come down to the rope walk house in Thornbeck for the winter, which the whole valley finds very funny, and which Soren refuses to explain to anyone. Marta Colt still runs the keep and always will. Tolvin Reed is warden of the Ram's Neck and is extremely poor at pretending he does not enjoy it. Their daughter was born the following autumn, black-haired and green-eyed and loud, and they named her Orla, for a woman who taught a child knots in a loft after dark because she thought somebody might need them one day. Their son came 2 years after that, and they named him Reed, and the captain had to leave the room. And Soren Ashfell still counts. He has never been able to stop, and Mirren has never once asked him to. But the tower wall is finished now, and what he keeps instead is a small ledger in his wife's square handwriting, and in it he writes down the ordinary things. Days the pass stayed open, nights the children slept through. Times he has been able to put his bare hand against her face, which he has stopped counting in 30s, because the number is simply every day, and it will be every day for the rest of his life. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Here's my question for you. When Soren paid out her contract and put her on that sled down the mountain, was he protecting her? Or was he refusing to believe she could fight for him? And be honest, which of those two would you have forgiven faster? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.